I always knew I had a special talent for creating innovative systems solutions. Since I was little, technology fascinated me, and this only grew over time. At the company where I work, I tirelessly dedicate myself to developing software proposals that can really make a difference. But unfortunately, my boss, Mark, has an infamous habit of stealing subordinates' ideas and presenting them as his own. This has happened to me several times, and the frustration only increased. Recently, I was working on a software proposal that I thought would be revolutionary for the company. I spent hours and hours of work, sleepless nights, all to make sure every detail was perfect. But, as usual, Mark started to get closer, curious about what I was developing. "Chris, what do you have there?" he asked, with that fake smile I knew so well. "It's a new data management software. I think it has the potential to optimize our processes by at least 30%, I replied, trying to hide the irritation in my voice. Interesting, Mark muttered, already starting to think about how he could take ownership of my idea. The situation at home was not easy either. My wife, Sarah, had recently lost her job, and our children depended on me to keep things going. I desperately needed a promotion, not just for recognition, but to support my family. With each passing day, the pressure increased. One night, while reviewing the project at home, Sarah noticed my tension. "Chris, you need to do something. You can't keep letting Mark take credit for your work," she said, worried. "I know, Sarah. I know. But what can I do? He always finds a way to come out on top," I replied, feeling helpless. It was then that I decided it was time to call it quits. I needed a plan, something that would finally reveal to the board of directors who was really behind the brilliant ideas. And I couldn't do it alone. In the office, I had an ally, Lisa, who had also suffered at Mark's hands. She was smart, determined, and as tired of Mark's manipulations as I was. "Lisa, I need your help. I have an idea, but it's risky," he told her in a conspiratorial tone. "I'm in." "What do you have in mind?" she replied, without hesitation. I explained my plan. We would create a sabotage version of my project. It would be full of subtle but devastating flaws once exposed. We knew that Mark, in his eagerness to take credit, would use this version at the next board meeting. "Do you think he'll fall for it?" Lisa asked, a little skeptical. "I'm sure. He never reviews anything carefully, he just wants to shine in front of the directors," I assured. We spent weeks meticulously working on the sabotaged version of the project. Every detail was planned to look legitimate, but with errors that Mark couldn't explain. At the same time, I was preparing the real version, ready to be presented as soon as Mark fell from grace. "We can't fail, Chris. This is our chance to unmask him," Lisa said, determined. "I know. And we won't fail," I replied, with the same determination. The night before the meeting, I could barely sleep. I reviewed each part of the plan, remembering the promises I made to Sarah and our children. This was my chance to change our lives for the better. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, my heart racing. Lisa was there, reviewing her part of the presentation. "Is everything ready?" I asked anxiously. "Yes. Let's do it," Lisa replied, with a confident smile. In the meeting room, the tension was palpable. Mark was there, confident as ever, ready to present his idea. But as he progressed through the presentation, the flaws began to become evident. The directors began to question him, and he, not knowing how to respond, began to sink. "Chris, it's now," Lisa whispered. I stood up, my heart pounding. It was the moment I had been waiting for. And I was ready to claim the recognition I always deserved. At the office, I was at my limit. Every day that passed, the frustration of seeing Mark take credit for my ideas ate at me inside. It was then that I found an unexpected ally, Lisa. She was one of the few people who truly understood what I was going through because she had also been a victim of Mark's manipulations in the past. Lisa was an intelligent, determined woman and, above all, tired of the injustices we saw daily. "Man, it's unbearable to see him presenting our ideas as if they were his," I told Lisa over a coffee break. I know exactly how you feel, Chris. I've been through this many times. But, maybe it's time to do something about it, she replied, a conspiratorial gleam in her eyes. That's when the idea started to take shape. We needed a plan to expose Mark and finally claim the recognition we deserved. We decided the best way would be to make him stumble at his own game. We would produce a sabotaged version of my project, full of flaws and inconsistencies, that Mark would certainly use at the next board meeting. If we can get him to use this sabotaged version, it's going to be a disaster for him, Lisa said with a smile. Yes, and while he sinks, I present the true version to the council. They will see who is really behind the brilliant ideas, I added, feeling a surge of hope and determination. We started working together, analyzing every detail of the project. We inserted subtle but devastating flaws. It was crucial that these inconsistencies were not obvious at first glance, but that they became evident during Mark's presentation, leaving him with no way out. This part of the code, if he doesn't know how to explain it, will be chaos, Lisa commented, as we reviewed one of the sections. Perfect. In this function here, if it tries to run, everything will stop, I added, laughing for the first time in weeks. During our planning sessions, we developed a complicity that gave us strength. We spent hours reviewing every detail, ensuring our plan was foolproof. Deep down, we knew we were playing a risky game, but the desire for justice was greater than any fear. The day before the meeting, Lisa looked at me seriously. Chris, are you ready for this? The pressure is going to be immense. I took a deep breath and replied, yes I am, Lisa. I can no longer live in the shadow of someone who doesn't deserve to be in the position they are in. And I need this promotion for my family. She nodded, understanding the depth of what was at stake. Let's do this together. I'll be there to support you. We agreed that I would focus on the final review of the sabotaged version, while Lisa prepared the revealing presentation, with the true version of the project. That night I barely slept, mentally reviewing each step of our plan. I was thinking about my wife, Sarah, and how this opportunity could change our lives. The next day, we arrived at the office early. The tension was palpable. We found a quiet corner and did one last check. It's all ready, Chris. It's going to be fine. Trust me, Lisa said, squeezing my shoulder. I'm counting on it, Lisa. Let's go. When the meeting began, Mark was confident, as always. He began to present the sabotaged version of the project, and soon the flaws began to appear. Board members began questioning every detail, and Mark, visibly nervous, was unable to respond adequately. That was my cue. I got up, and with Lisa's help, I presented the true version of the project. The council's reaction was immediate. They were impressed with the quality and innovation of my proposal. Finally, the recognition I sought so much was there, within my reach. And so, with Lisa's unwavering support, we unmasked Mark and finally showed who was really behind the brilliant ideas driving the company. Discovering that Mark was involved in unethical practices was, without a doubt, one of the most impactful moments of my career. It all started unexpectedly. I was in the office, immersed in my work as usual, when I happened to find some compromising documents. They were in a generically labeled folder, as if Mark was confident that no one would ever have the courage to go through his files. When I opened the folder, my heart skipped a beat. There were records of suspicious financial transfers, emails exchanged with suppliers that weren't on our official radar, and even evidence that Mark was diverting company funds to personal accounts. It was a bomb waiting to explode, and I found myself in a moral dilemma I never imagined I would face. I knew I needed to talk to Lisa. She has always been a faithful ally, and more than ever, I needed her perspective. So, that same afternoon, I asked her to have coffee outside the office. Lisa, I need to show you something, I said, as I took the folder out of my backpack. His eyes widened as he began to leaf through the documents. My God, Chris, this is serious. If this comes to light, it could destroy the company, she said, visibly worried. I know. And now? What we do? I asked, feeling the weight of responsibility. Lisa was thoughtful for a moment before responding. We need to be strategic. We have to decide if we're going to use this to our advantage or just focus on unmasking Mark in the meeting with the sabotaged project, she suggested. I spent the night awake, pondering the best way to deal with the situation. On the one hand, there was the chance to finally get the recognition I deserved, ensuring my family's financial stability. On the other, there was the ethical responsibility to expose Mark's fraud and protect the integrity of the company. The next day, I returned to the office with a firm decision. I called Lisa for a private conversation. Lisa, I thought about this a lot. I can't ignore what we discovered. It would be irresponsible and unethical of me. We need to expose Mark, but in a way that doesn't compromise the meeting and our initial strategy, I declared, determined. Lisa nodded in agreement. You're right, Chris. Let's do this the right way. We can present the evidence to the council after we reveal the true version of the project. This way, we ensure that our competence is recognized first, she planned. Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly to organize the evidence and prepare a presentation that was impossible to ignore. I was nervous, but I also felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, the truth would come out. On the morning of the big meeting, nervousness was at its peak. Lisa and I arrived at the office early, going over every detail one last time. When the meeting began, Mark was confident, as always. He started the presentation with the sabotaged version of the project, and soon the flaws began to appear. The board members began questioning Mark, who clearly didn't know how to respond. That was my cue. I got up and, with Lisa by my side, began to present the true version of the project. The reaction was immediate. The board was impressed with the clarity and innovation of my work. But wait, gentlemen, I said, ending my presentation. There is something else you need to know. I then revealed Mark's fraud and unethical practices, presenting all the evidence we had gathered. The room was completely silent, and I could see the disbelief in the director's eyes. After brief deliberation, the board came back with its decision. Mark would be fired immediately, and an internal investigation would be launched. I was eventually promoted to a leadership position. Sitting in the empty meeting room, I felt a mix of relief and accomplishment. My career and family were safe, and justice was served. At that moment, I received a call from Sarah, my wife, sharing the news that she had gotten a new job. It was the icing on the cake, a sign that everything was finally coming together. Chris, we did it! She exclaimed, and I couldn't help but smile. Yes, we did it, Sarah. We achieved. With the board meeting approaching, the tension in the office was palpable. Lisa and I were divided in tasks, each focused on a crucial part of our plan. I had the sabotaged version of the project in hand, and I needed to ensure that the flaws were subtle but devastating when exposed. There could be no room for error. Every detail counted, and precision was essential. I spent hours reviewing the code, leaving out specific holes that would only be noticed by someone with a deep understanding of the system. Meanwhile, Lisa was immersed in preparing the revealing presentation. The actual version of the project was ready and flawless, and she made sure that each slide in the presentation was clear, objective, and impressive. We knew we couldn't fail. This was our chance to expose Mark and claim the recognition I had always deserved. One afternoon, as we were fine-tuning the last details, Lisa looked at me with a determined gleam in her eyes and said, "Chris, we're going to make it. This is our moment." I took a deep breath and replied, "I know, Lisa. I just hope everything goes as planned. We can't afford to make mistakes. Trust in our work." "We know what we're doing," she said confidently. The night before the big meeting, anxiety got the better of me. I spent the night awake, reviewing every detail of the plan, mentally going over every flaw inserted in the sabotaged version and thinking about the promises I made to my wife and children. The image of Sarah, my wife, and the look of hope from my children gave me the strength I needed. I knew this was my chance to change our lives. For the better. The next day, Lisa and I arrived at the office early. The atmosphere was one of tension and expectation. I could feel my heart beating fast as we waited for Mark's presentation to begin. The board of directors was meeting, and Mark, with his usual arrogant confidence, began to present the sabotaged version of the project. We watched closely as he moved through the slides, trying to maintain a neutral expression. The flaws began to appear, first subtly, then more evident. The council members began to exchange suspicious glances and murmur among themselves. One of the directors, Mr. Thompson, interrupted Mark. "Mark, this doesn't make sense. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Mark, visibly disconcerted, tried to get around the situation. "Oh, it must be a small formatting error. Let me check." Lisa and I exchanged a knowing look. We knew this was the beginning of the end for Mark. As the presentation progressed, inconsistencies accumulated and criticism from the directors intensified. Mark was increasingly shaken, sweating and stuttering. It was then that I saw my opportunity. I stood up, trying to remain calm, and said, "If I may, I believe I can clarify these issues." The eyes turned to me, and I felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. With Lisa's help, I began to present the true version of the project. Every slide was clear, every detail precise. The room was silent as I explained the software's features and innovations. The directors were visibly impressed. When I finished, Mr. Thompson stood up and said, "Chris, that's brilliant. How could something like that have been so distorted in Mark's presentation?" Lisa, seizing the moment, added, "Because, Mr. Thompson, Mark is not the author of this project. Chris is the real genius behind these ideas." The revelation caused a stir in the room. Mark tried to defend himself, but the evidence was clear. The board finally recognized my work and competence. The feeling of relief and justice was indescribable. Looking at Lisa, I felt immense gratitude. She smiled and said, "You did it, Chris. Finally, your talent has been recognized." I smiled back, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new phase in my professional and personal life. The day before the big meeting, I couldn't sleep a wink. Anxiety was eating me up inside, and every time I closed my eyes, my mind started going over every detail of the plan we had come up with. I knew this was my chance to change my life and that of my family for the better. Sarah, my wife, lay next to me, her peaceful sleep contrasting with the whirlwind of emotions I was feeling. I got up slowly so as not to wake her and went to the living room, where my laptop was open with the sabotaged presentation that Mark was going to use the next day. I sat down at the table, took a deep breath and started reviewing everything once again. "Chris, you need to get some rest," said Sarah, appearing silently in the room's doorway. "You're going to need to be at your best tomorrow." I smiled at her, trying to look more confident than I actually felt. "I know, love, but it's just another quick review. I want to make sure everything is perfect." She walked over and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I believe in you. You'll make it. And when this is all over, let's celebrate with the kids, okay?" I nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude for having someone like Sarah by my side. "Okay. I promise I'll try to get some sleep after this." Sarah returned to the room, and I immersed myself in work again. Every line of sabotaged code, every slide with incorrect information, everything had to be perfect for Mark to stumble without realizing it. At the same time, the real presentation that Lisa and I had prepared was ready, waiting to be revealed at the right time. In the morning, my tiredness was evident, but the adrenaline kept me going. Lisa and I arrived at the office early, as we had agreed. The tension was palpable. We exchanged a complicit look, knowing there was no turning back. "Are you ready?" Lisa asked, trying to hide her own anxiety. "Yes, I am," I replied, trying to sound confident. "Let's make this work." The board of directors began to meet in the conference room, and Mark entered with his usual air of superiority. We sat at the back of the room, waiting for the presentation to begin. Mark began to speak, showing off the sabotaged version of the project with a self-satisfied smile. As he progressed, flaws began to emerge. Little mistakes that piled up and became impossible to ignore. The council members began to murmur, and soon the questions began to pour in. "Mark, can you explain this discrepancy here?" asked one of the directors, frowning. Mark began to stutter, clearly surprised and not knowing how to respond. There must be some mistake. I'll check it out." Lisa and I exchanged a meaningful look. It was our chance. I stood up and, with a firm step, walked to the front of the room. "Gentlemen and ladies of the council, if you will allow me, I think I can clarify these issues," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Lisa approached with the laptop containing the actual presentation. "Who are you?" asked another director, clearly intrigued. "I am Chris, the true author of this project." And what Mark was presenting was not the final work. "Allow me to show you the correct version." With Lisa's help, I began to show the real presentation. Every slide, every detail, was perfect. The reaction of the council members was immediate, with expressions of surprise and admiration. "That's impressive," said one of the directors. "Why haven't we been introduced to this before?" "Because Mark was taking credit for my work," I replied, feeling courage rising within me. "And that's not all. There are more things you need to know about Mark's practices." As I began to expose Mark's financial fraud and other unethical activities, the board was visibly shocked. I presented the hard evidence that Lisa and I had gathered, making it clear that the integrity of the company was at stake. When I finished, the silence in the room was deafening. Mark was pale, not knowing what to say. The directors retreated to a closed-door meeting, and Lisa and I waited, our hearts racing. Finally, they came back with the decision. Mark was fired immediately, and an internal investigation was launched. As for me, I was promoted to a leadership position, finally receiving the recognition I always deserved. At that moment, I felt a mix of relief and euphoria. Justice had been served, and I knew our lives were about to change for the better. When I got home, I told Sarah everything, who hugged me emotionally. "I knew you could do it," she said, with tears in her eyes. And, as if fate wanted to reward us, Sarah received an unexpected call. She had gotten a new job, at a company that competes with Mark's old company. Now, together, we were ready to face any challenge and ensure that corrupt practices like Mark's never harm others again. On the day of the meeting, the tension in the air was almost palpable. Lisa and I arrived at the office early, both carrying a mix of nervousness and determination. This was the moment we had been waiting for and meticulously planned for. Sitting in the small waiting room, we tried to remain calm as the clock seemed to move slower than ever. "Chris, are you okay?" Lisa asked, noticing my uneasiness. "I'm just a little nervous," I replied, trying to hide the anxiety that was consuming me. "But I know we're prepared. There's no way it can go wrong." She nodded, offering an encouraging smile. I knew she was nervous too, but her confidence was an anchor for me at that moment. Finally, we were called to the meeting room. The board of directors had already met, and Mark was standing, ready to begin his presentation. The atmosphere was formal and silent, and I could feel the directors' curious eyes on us. Mark, confident as ever, began presenting the sabotaged version of my project. "Gentlemen and ladies, today I present the revolutionary solution that will transform our company," said Mark, with that arrogant tone I knew so well. In the first few minutes, everything seemed to go as he planned. But soon, the subtle flaws we inserted began to emerge. Small details that didn't make sense, inconsistencies in the data, and logical errors that any competent analyst would notice. "Mark, this doesn't look right," one of the directors interrupted, frowning as he examined the graphics on the screen. "Can you explain this discrepancy?" Mark hesitated, visibly disconcerted. Of course, it must be a small error. I will correct it immediately." But the questions didn't stop there. Another director, with a skeptical expression, raised his hand. "What about this part? The numbers don't match previous projections. How do you explain that?" I could see the sweat starting to break out on Mark's forehead. He was lost, tripping over his own words as he tried to justify the unjustifiable. It was at that moment that I realized our chance had arrived. I exchanged a quick look with Lisa, who nodded discreetly. I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady and clear. "Excuse me, gentlemen and ladies, if you'll allow me, I think I can clarify these matters." The eyes turned to me, and Mark gave me a withering look. But I ignored it, focusing only on the advice. "I'm Chris, the analyst responsible for the original development of this project. Unfortunately, it appears that there were some modifications that were not anticipated. I would like to present the true version of the project, the one that has been meticulously reviewed and is free of errors." With Lisa's help, we began the presentation. As we progressed, I could see the director's expressions change from skepticism to surprise and finally to admiration. The true version of the project was clear, cohesive, and brilliant. Exactly as I had planned. "That's impressive, Chris," commented one of the directors, visibly impressed. "Why wasn't this version introduced initially?" "Unfortunately, there was a misunderstanding," I replied, trying to be diplomatic. "But the important thing is that now you can see the true potential of the project." Mark was pale, completely defeated. He tried to intervene, but his voice was drowned out by the director's praise and lively discussion of the performance they had just seen. "Chris, you demonstrated not only competence but also integrity in bringing us the correct version," said the board chairman. "We will deliberate on this, but I must say I am extremely impressed." As the board met behind closed doors, Lisa and I exchanged a knowing smile. We knew we had one. When the directors returned, the decision was quick and clear: Mark was fired, and an internal investigation would be launched. "Chris, congratulations," said the president, extending his hand. "You're promoted. We need more people like you leading this company." Emotion overwhelmed me. Finally, all my hard work and dedication was recognized. As I left the meeting room, I felt a huge weight lifted from my shoulders. I knew at that moment that my life and that of my family were about to change for the better. "We did it, Lisa," I said, hugging my friend and ally. "We achieved." "Yes, we did it, Chris," she replied, with a beaming smile. "This is just the beginning." I was sitting in the conference room, watching Mark stumble over every detail as he tried to present the sabotaged version of my project. The tension was palpable. I could see the sweat running down Mark's forehead as the members of the board of directors began to question his competence. "Mark, that doesn't make sense. How can you justify those numbers?" asked one of the directors, visibly irritated. I exchanged a look with Lisa, who was sitting next to me. She gave me a slight nod of encouragement, indicating that this was my chance. I took a deep breath and stood up, trying to control the mixture of nervousness and excitement that was taking over me. "Excuse me, gentlemen," I began, my voice firm and clear. "I believe I can clarify these issues." Mark looked at me with an expression of panic and anger at the same time, but I ignored him. I walked to the front of the room, adjusting my laptop to begin presenting the real version of the project. "Gentlemen, what you just saw was a preliminary and incomplete version of the project," I explained. "Allow me to show you the real proposal, which I believe will meet everyone's expectations." With one click, I projected the first screen of my presentation. Lisa joined me, ready to help with any technical questions that arose. As we progressed through the presentation, it was clear that the board members were impressed. The questions they had thrown at Mark turned into compliments and positive comments. "This is really innovative, Chris," commented one of the directors. "Why wasn't this version presented from the beginning?" I looked directly at Mark before responding. "Unfortunately, there was a misunderstanding about who should present the project. But I'm here now to make sure you see the real proposal." Lisa intervened, explaining some of the more complex technical aspects of the software. She did an excellent job, and I was grateful to have her by my side. "You did an exceptional job," said the board president, visibly impressed. "Chris, it's clear you're the true genius behind this idea." The room was filled with murmurs of approval, and I felt relieved and validated. But I knew there was still more to be done. I exchanged another look with Lisa, and she gave me a slight nod. It was time to expose Mark's corrupt practices. "Gentlemen, Before we conclude, there is something else I need to share with you, I began, my voice now thick with determination. During the development of this project, I discovered several unethical practices involving our boss, Mark. The board members' eyes widened in surprise, and I continued, presenting the hard evidence that Lisa and I had gathered. I showed documents, emails, and financial records that detailed Mark's fraud and other unethical activities. These practices not only compromise the integrity of our company, but also put our reputation in the market at risk, I concluded, feeling a huge weight lifted from my shoulders. The silence in the room was deafening. The council president stood up, clearly shaken by the revelations. "We need a closed-door meeting to deliberate on this," he announced, and all council members left. Lisa and I stayed in the room, nervously waiting for the verdict. A few minutes later, the council returned. "The board has decided to dismiss Mark with immediate effect and launch an internal investigation to address the fraud," the chairman said. "Chris, you are promoted to a leadership position, and we recognize that you are deserving of this recognition." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Lisa gave me a tight hug, and I felt the happy tears start to come. Finally, my hard work and integrity had been recognized. At that moment, I received an unexpected call. It was Sarah, my wife. "Chris, I got a new job," she exclaimed, her voice full of joy. "That's amazing, Sarah," I replied, excited. "Where is?" "It's at a company that competes with Mark's old company. They are very interested in ensuring integrity and transparency, especially after the frauds that were revealed." I smiled, feeling that things were finally falling into place. "We did it, Sarah. We did it." And so, with Lisa's support and my family's strength, I celebrated not only my personal and professional overcoming, but also Mark's downfall, who finally received the punishment he deserved. The tension in the air was almost palpable as I watched the board of directors, their expressions ranging from shock to outrage. I knew I had to seize the moment. Taking a deep breath, I stood up, feeling the weight of years of frustration and unrecognized work. "Gentlemen and ladies of the council," I began, my voice sounding firmer than I expected, "before we proceed with the project evaluation, there is something very serious I need to share with you." Their gazes turned to me, curiosity and skepticism written all over their faces. Mark, still trying to recover from the disastrous performance, looked at me with a mix of surprise and anger. "Chris, what are you doing?" he hissed, but I ignored him. "Over the past few months, I have been collecting evidence of unethical practices occurring within this company," I continued, maintaining eye contact with the board members. "These practices not only compromise the integrity of our organization, but also put its financial stability and reputation at risk." Lisa, who was next to me, opened a file on her laptop and projected a series of compromising documents and emails onto the screen. The silence in the room was deafening as the tests were displayed one by one. These documents clearly show that Mark was involved in financial fraud, embezzling funds, and manipulating reports for his own benefit, I concluded, feeling a mixture of nervousness and relief at seeing the director's reactions of shock and disapproval. "This is absurd," Mark exploded, standing up from his chair. "These accusations are false. It's a desperate attempt by a resentful employee." "I'm sure the council will be able to evaluate the veracity of the evidence," I replied calmly. Lisa and I spent weeks checking every detail. "These are not just accusations, they are facts." The chairman of the board, Mr. Thompson, raised his hand, signaling Mark to calm down. "Mark, the evidence presented is overwhelming. We will deliberate on this immediately." As the council met behind closed doors, the tension in the conference room was almost unbearable. Lisa gave me an encouraging handshake. "We did what was right, Chris. No matter what happens now, you can be proud of this." I nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude for having Lisa by my side through this entire process. It didn't take long for the council to return. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, we have decided to dismiss Mark with immediate effect, Mr. Thompson stated. In addition, an internal investigation will be launched to examine all fraud committed. Mark turned pale, his confidence crumbling before our eyes. "You can't do this. I built this company." "And nearly destroyed it," retorted Mr. Thompson. "Chris, we would like to offer you a promotion to a leadership position. His integrity and competence are exactly what we need to guide this company from now on." The feeling of relief and accomplishment was overwhelming. Finally, all my effort and dedication were being recognized. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I accept the position with honor and promise to work tirelessly to restore the integrity of our company." After the meeting, as Lisa and I were leaving the conference room, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Chris, you won't believe it. I got the job at that competing company. They offered me a great salary and benefits." "Really, Sarah? This is amazing!" I exclaimed, feeling an indescribable joy. "I think today is a winning day for both of us. And best of all, Chris," she continued, "with this new job, I'll be able to help ensure that corrupt practices like Mark's never harm others again." I smiled, feeling lighter than ever. "We're in this together, Sarah. Let's celebrate our overcoming and the beginning of a new era." And so, with Mark's downfall and the promise of a brighter future, Sarah and I celebrate not only our personal and professional achievements, but also justice finally prevailing. After the closed-door meeting, the board of directors returns with a serious but determined expression. The president of the board, Mr. Almeida, takes the floor first. I feel my heart beating faster as he adjusts his glasses and starts to speak. After careful analysis of the evidence presented, and considering the performance in today's presentation, we have made some important decisions. The room is completely silent. I feel Lisa by my side, her presence giving me strength. Mr. Almeida continues. "First of all, Mark is fired effective immediately. We cannot tolerate unethical practices in our company. An internal investigation will be launched to address the financial fraud discovered." I see Mark pale. He tries to protest. "This is absurd. You can't do this to me." But Mr. Almeida firmly interrupts him. "We're sorry, Mark, but the evidence is conclusive. We ask that you leave immediately." Mark leaves the room, visibly shaken and defeated. I turn to Lisa, and she gives me an encouraging smile. Mr. Almeida then addresses me. "Chris, your presentation was exemplary. He showed a competence and integrity that we desperately need in this company. It is with great pleasure that we announce your promotion to Director of Software Development." I feel a huge weight being lifted off my shoulders. The emotion is overwhelming, and I can only mutter, "Thank you, sir. This means a lot to me." Mr. Almeida smiles and continues. "From now on, we want to establish a new era of integrity and transparency in this company. We count on you to lead this change." Lisa, who has also been crucial in this process, is praised by the board and is promoted to project manager, working directly with me. I feel a rush of gratitude for everything she has done to support me. After the meeting, Lisa and I headed to my new office. As we settle in, she jokes. "Who knew, huh? From underrated analyst to director, all in one day." We laughed together, relieved and satisfied that justice had finally been done. I feel a positive vibration in the air, a feeling of renewal that permeates the entire environment. The company is committed to adopting a new stance, and I am an integral part of that. At the end of the day, I receive a call that makes the day even more perfect. It's Sarah, my wife. Her voice is full of joy. "Chris, I got the job. They hired me." "That's wonderful, Sarah." I respond, feeling lighter than ever. "Where are you going to work?" She pauses for a moment before responding. "You won't believe it. It's at the company that competes with Mark's old one. They were impressed with my resume and experience." My mind races, connecting the dots. The irony of the situation does not go unnoticed. Sarah continues. "And you know the best? The company is committing to ensure that corrupt practices like Mark's never harm others again. It seems like they really learned from our story." I smile, feeling a rush of satisfaction and accomplishment. Justice has been served, and not just for me, but for the entire company and, indirectly, for Sarah. Our life is finally stabilizing. Sarah, this is perfect. We did it, together. Let's celebrate this victory. We returned home that night with a feeling of achievement. We sat at the dinner table with our children, sharing the good news and celebrating the new phase of our lives. Sarah and I toast to our resilience and the bright future that awaits us. Finally, I feel that recognition and justice have been achieved, and that we are ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead, together. At the most emotional moment, I was in the middle of a team meeting when my cell phone started vibrating insistently. I looked at the screen and saw Sarah, my wife's name, flashing. I excused myself for a moment and left the conference room, my heart racing. I answered the call with a mixture of anxiety and hope. "Hi, love," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Did something happen?" "Chris," Sarah replied, her voice brimming with joy. "I got the job. I was hired." I felt a wave of relief and happiness wash over me. My wife had fallen on hard times after losing her job, and seeing the joy in her voice was just what I needed at that moment. "That's incredible, Sarah," I exclaimed, unable to contain my excitement. "Where are you going to work?" "You won't believe it," she replied, laughing. "The company that hired me is a direct competitor to Mark's old company." I was surprised by the coincidence. It was as if the universe was conspiring in our favor. The impact of Mark's fall was unfolding in ways I never could have imagined. "This is too much," I replied, still processing the news. "And what are you going to do there?" "I'll work on the compliance team," Sarah explained. "I will help ensure that corrupt practices like Mark's never harm others again." I couldn't be more proud of Sarah. She had always been a strong, determined woman, and now she was about to make a real difference in a position that really mattered. "There couldn't be a better person for this job," I said, sincerely. "I'm so happy for you, love. Let's celebrate tonight." "Clear," Sarah agreed. "I can't wait to see you and celebrate together." I hung up the phone with a smile on my face and a huge weight lifted from my shoulders. I returned to the conference room, where Lisa and the other colleagues were waiting for me, curious to know the reason for my euphoria. "Good news?" asked Lisa, raising an eyebrow. "The best," I replied, still smiling. "Sarah got a new job, and it's at a direct competitor to Mark's old company. She will work on the compliance team, helping to ensure that corrupt practices like his never harm others again." Lisa smiled, sharing my joy. "That's fantastic, Chris. It seems like everything is finally coming together." "Yes, it seems so," I agreed. "And it's great to know that we're making a real difference, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who was affected by Mark's actions." That night, when I got home, Sarah welcomed me with a tight hug. We were both beaming with happiness and relief. We sat at the table, toasted with wine that we saved for special occasions, and talked about the future. "Do you think Mark will really pay for everything he did?" asked Sarah, after a while. "I'm sure of that," I replied. "The council is determined to take this investigation seriously, and with the evidence we've gathered, there's no way he can escape." Sarah nodded, looking calmer. "What about us? What comes next?" "Well, with your new position and my promotion, I think we're ready for anything," I replied, holding his hand. "We will continue to work hard, but we will also enjoy what we have achieved. We deserve this." She smiled, and in that moment, I felt like we were finally where we were supposed to be. We had overcome enormous challenges, both personal and professional, and emerged stronger and more united on the other side. And at the same time, we contribute to positive change, ensuring that injustices like the ones we suffered do not happen to others. That night was a celebration of our achievements, but also a reminder that, together, we could face any adversity. And as we toasted to the future, we knew we were ready to write a new chapter in our lives, one full of hope, love, and justice.